Just remember, it's all a blooper reel. Life is the blooper reel.
Life's a blooper reel.
It is, so it's okay. Hello. All right, we good?
Yes.
Here's our screen thingy saying. Okay. Hi, welcome back to Bringing Turkey to the Table, where we talk about Turkish feasts and attempt to try our very darned best to make Turkish food. Does it turn out? Sometimes.
Most of the time.
Part of the time. But last week we were talking about feasting practices at Neolithic Göbekli Tepe and made some pretty interesting Monty, not bad. But today we are moving to southwest Turkey and we're going to look at the Hellenistic site of Labraunda. And joining me today is Nina, a PhD student at FSU. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
What are you more excited about, food or talking?
Food.
That's fair. Okay.
Although, we'll see how this actually turns out.
Yeah. What are we making?
So we're gonna make basically a Turkish flatbread.
Okay.
It's called pide. And it's going to be like an ovular, almost football-shaped thing. You know, like typical flatbreads, rectangle, pizza, circular, pide.
Okay. Can I make it so just like this long?
Yeah.
Do I just squish it?
Yeah, so we're gonna squish it and roll out our...
Should slap it. Alright, anyway, we should squish it and roll it.
Yeah, so we're gonna try to make a little ovular device.
Okay.
And then we can either fill it up with two different types of filling. One is a meat, and so I've prepared for us a ground beef and chorizo mixture with garlic, salt, pepper, and lots of parsley. And now usually they would actually serve this with ground lamb.
Okay.
And various amounts of beef, but ground lamb is expensive, so I went with the chorizo, which was not as expensive.
That is fair.
And I think the mixture turned out pretty good, so hopefully it will taste good. And the other type is a cheese pide. And usually it would be made with a Turkish cheese, however, I didn't know where to get that in Tallahassee.
Fair.
Yes. But the recipe I was looking at said you could substitute mozzarella for it, so hence we have mozzarella.
I love mozzarella. And
then
feta?
Yes, feta was a part of the recipe, so feta goes on top, mix it all together, add more parsley, and then you can finish it off with some egg on top.
Perfect. I'm gonna give us some ambiance.
Ooh, love ambiance.
There we go. Now we're ready. Actually, I have to take off the 10 rings I'm wearing.
Oh, that's actually a good idea.
This is pause for rings.
No, leave it in.
Okay. Now we're ready.
Yes.
All right. So as we go,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna ask you questions.
Okay.
Gonna make my ovular shape, and you're gonna teach me a thing or two.
We're gonna try our damnest.
We're gonna try. So let's just start off. What is Labraunda?
So Labraunda is actually a sanctuary site. It's not really...
Sorry.
I just love it.
It's a sanctuary site. It's a sanctuary site. That's important.
Yes, it's a sanctuary site for the god Zeus Labraundos.
Okay.
And now Zeus Labraundos is a little bit different from other depictions of Zeus. Wow, this is really not stretching. I can do this.
We can do this. You just shake it a bit. Let gravity do the work.
But so
Zeus
Zeus is usually depicted with a lightning bolt, as we see most of the time in Greek vases, in statuary, etc., etc.
Yeah, my student made me one today.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Okay, so lightning bolts.
So usually Zeus has a lightning bolt. However, in the depictions of Zeus Labraundos, he actually is holding a double axe.
Ooh, okay, that's different.
Mm-hmm. And it stems from the myth of Heracles, actually. After he defeats Hippolyta, he supposedly gives the double axe then to his father Zeus, and that's why he's holding the double axe in this particular setting.
Okay, so the site is a sanctuary to this special axe Zeus.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably connected to another Hittite god. So more in connection to a, quote, local deity as opposed to necessarily a bringing over of a Greek god.
Gotcha.
But it does borrow on some of those stories.
I love cultural cross-pollination.
Yes, we do.
That's the go-to word.
I think we should replace synchronization with cross-cultural pollination.
Cross-pollen. Yes, bees are cool.
Save the bees. So what's interesting about this sanctuary site is that it definitely existed long before the Hellenistic period, but there's no archaeological evidence that predates it before the 7th century BCE.
Okay, so interesting.
And what I kind of think is interesting about that is that actually Homer references the Labraundans, or at the very least the sort of region itself, which is ancient Caria in southwest Turkey. And if you are ever having to read through the catalog of the ships...
I hope not.
No, God, no. Then he actually mentions the Carians as fighting for the Trojans.
Oh!
So they're small...
The losers.
Yes.
Okay.
Although the real winners, if you think of the Romans as, like, later Trojans.
So our earliest evidence is very different from the Hellenistic period that we were talking about.
It was probably just a small sanctuary with a little grove in front of it, but nothing necessarily to, like, call Athens about.
Oh, call Athens about.
That was my poor attempt at, like, call Rome about.
I liked it.
No,
I
it
started
was
saying
bad.
that. Call Athens about. Okay, so I hear that a particular family is fairly important in the chronology of this, and I'm going to try not to say it wrong. The
Hecatomnids.
Hecatomnids.
Yes, those people. Yes, so as I said, the site was not necessarily, like, empty. It's clearly a sacred site. And there was a feast ritual that went on before the Hellenistic period. We just don't have too much evidence for it. But once the Persians sort of come into power in this region and establish what are called satraps, so basically like the local provincial elite and ruling class, then they put in charge the Hecatomnid family over this Carian region. And so there's been a lot of interesting discussion on the building program, because you go from this smaller, archaic to classical sanctuary site, and then all of a sudden you have these massive marble structures that pop up in the 4th century.
And she got big.
She got big. As my professor would have called it, they made it marvelicious.
Okay, do I start putting things on?
Yeah, we can go ahead and start
Can I
moving
eat
on.
some?
Yes.
Don't look at me.
I think I will go for the meat one then.
Okay. You don't get cheese, I get cheese.
Yeah, typically you don't add cheese to the meat-filled one.
Oh, okay. Oh man, you get to touch all the meat. Weird. You
edit that out.
Take that part out. It's
Now leave it in.
Okay.
But I forgot.
Okay.
Oh
so,
no, the building project.
Yeah, we're talking about what the site looks like in that sense, in the building projects.
So there's been some interesting discussions on the nature of this project. Originally, it was more thought that it went in chronological order. So the head father, we're about to talk about the family.
Okay.
Hecatomnus first set up a cult statue to Zeus Labraundus in bronze, probably in this older, more classical / archaic sanctuary to the deity. And that's the one that stayed pretty much for the rest of the tenure there.
Okay.
And then once his oldest son, Mausolus, comes into power, then we really start to see a lot more buildings being built in the site itself. You have various propylaea, which are these grand entrance buildings. So the way that you actually enter the site is through these more grand marble entrances.
Okay.
And then you come upon various stoas, and the stoa is basically just this long colonnaded area with various rooms. And we'll talk more about the stoas here in a little bit, but basically in everyday use, it's a good way to stay out of the sun, have a good place to meet up and talk.
Yeah, hang out.
Yeah, just kind of have fun, vibe a little bit. But in terms of the actual ritual process. Yes, hello.
Cut this.
But so these stoas will serve as later areas for dining to take place in what is the grand feast of Labraunda.
Ah, okay. Like we're making food now. Okay, stoas.
So you have the stoas, and then there are other monuments that are put up, most notably the various andrones.
Okay.
Now, andrones are a more Greek sort of definition. Obviously, they stand for like the men's hall. So,
Men.
yeah, the audacity. But so this is where we get into the debate between modern scholars, because there's what's known as cleverly labeled Andron A and B.
Haha.
There's also a C, but that's later Roman shit, so.
They're definitely known for their wit.
Modern scholars.
It's just so much cheese.
I mean, that's what's gonna make it good.
Okay, I don't know when I should stop adding cheese.
Whatever makes you happy.
Okay.
I honestly don't know when I'm gonna stop smoothing out the meat.
Okay. Continue. Tell me more about the brilliantly named A and B, and maybe also C.
Yes, C. But that's later, so I won't. It's later Roman androne, so I will not talk about.
Leave them wanting a little.
But so these andrones, don't be confused, B is supposedly the earlier one.
That's not how the alphabet works, but okay.
You can blame the French. They're the ones who
I always blame the French. Oh, this is good. Okay.
So these andrones are typically these more men halls, but they do have associations with dining practices. And even though one is later than the other, they're inscribed by various members of the Hecatomnid family.
Okay.
So one of them was set up by the older son, Mausolus, and the other was set up by Idrius.
Okay.
And usually you would look at that and probably think, well, Idrius is the younger, he becomes satrap after his brother, so this must be like a chronological order here.
Yeah.
But actually, when scholars have looked at the epigraphic remains on the andrones, the wording of Idrius's andron doesn't distinguish him as a satrap, and it actually gives him a different ethnicity, if you want to call it.
Okay.
As opposed, so if he had set this up while he was satrap, there would have been reference probably to Halicarnassus, which was the more political headquarters of the time.
Okay, makes sense. Government things.
Exactly. But instead he refers to himself as a smaller Turkish town that's about 14 kilometers away from this sanctuary site.
Okay.
Which has led to the interpretation that he wasn't actually satrap yet when he set up the monument.
Oh.
So now there's questions about when the actual andrones were set up and at what points were they set up. Although I think what's more important is that they were there to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can go back and forth and argue which one was there first and which brother set up which one first, but I think it's more important that they're there, and when we talk about more of the feast itself, that will probably make more sense when we get to it.
Yeah.
But so you have these andrones.
Okay.
You have the stoas, the great big entrance, and probably the most important part of the building project is the temple to Zeus itself. It probably replaced this earlier sanctuary, but now we have an actual more Ionic temple with a cella, and now houses the bronze sculpture that Hecatomnus dedicated to the site. And I believe it was set up by the younger brother Idrius, which then it starts to make more sense, this idea of chronology, because yes, you have the earlier sanctuary, but wouldn't it also make sense that you would want, if you're revamping the sanctuary site, you would want to revamp the main cultic center of the site, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, what are you going to invest time and money and effort into?
Exactly.
Why not? One of the most important parts of the place itself.
So we have all of these monumental buildings that are going to be very helpful and really set the family apart when it comes to this grand feasting ritual that takes place at the site. A few other additions that were made by the family are the oikoi houses, and this is essentially where the priests and their families probably lived. The actual site itself, unless it was during these feast rituals, was probably not very populated.
Oh.
You would have, it's not necessarily a traditional village in the sense. It would have, obviously, the priests, their families, slaves and other workers, people who were in charge of keeping the site orderly, and probably farmers as well, but it wasn't necessarily like a town as we would think of it.
Interesting.
Later in the Roman times, baths get added and more traditional things that we would think of for a city, but not at this particular time.
Okay. So, it's not necessarily a town per se.
Right.
But how come it becomes so important?
So this is where we start to get into these larger ideas of the feasting ritual itself.
Okay.
Because it was clearly an important site for the larger Carian region. This symbol of Zeus Labraundus appears frequently on their coinage.
Okay.
And so Zeus himself was just one of the major deities to be worshipped in this area at this time. So it's an important cultic symbol. And if you are these new rulers taking over the region, I'm going to take some photos. So.
Yeah, if you're taking over a region,
you want
to take over their gods.
Exactly. You want to show that you both care about their practices, care about their deities, and also just like you care about them in general. And what a great way to show this than by revamping one of their cultic sites and really bringing attention to this major festival.
Okay.
And so it kind of becomes this religious center of the ancient Carians and of just the Labraundans themselves. What are words?
What are words?
So I think what would be good now is we should put these in the oven.
We have eggs. Do we put eggs on them?
Yes. So typically the meat one doesn't always have eggs, but I think I'm going to add an egg to mine.
Okay. Eggs are great.
Yes, but I think we should move these to the tray first before we put the eggs on.
Okay.
But, so we're going to go ahead and cook these.
Yeah, and then we can come and talk about feasting as we feast ourselves. Ba-dum-cha. This is just to document the fact that Nina's egg has escaped.
No!
You see the egg? This is for shame. This is for Nina's shame. Now watch me crack my egg.
Wait, yours isn't in frame.
This is for the blooper reel.
Okay.
I can't crack an egg. Oh God.
I believe in you.
Here she goes. Here she goes again. I've never met the person for whom this is.
So you have much more.
Oh, look at that control!
That was pretty good.
Whoa!
Really good. Like, I think I might need to start making this in my everyday life. We successfully made pide.
Beautiful. Look how great my egg is. My egg did not run. Nina's egg ran.
Shut up.
It's beautiful. I'll still share with you.
They're both beautiful in their own way.
You're right. They are. And now we can feast, and Nina can tell me about the feast at Labraunda.
Perfect. What a segue.
What a segue. Which is differently spelled than the Segway you ride. Which is probably common knowledge. But I learned that last week.
I didn't know it until you told me. So we've talked a bit about the Hecatomnid family, the general-ish makeup of the site itself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god, this looks so good.
Oh, yeah. That is the stuff. Why is that so good?
I think I need to incorporate this into my diet.
Me too.
So, actually, fun fact when I was reading about Turkish pide is that when I was looking at the types of meat you're supposed to use, it specifically said don't buy or don't use, like, lean meats. Now, usually I buy the more lean meats because it doesn't have as much fat, and my Orange Theory coaches have really beaten that out of me over the past 2 years. But you're supposed to try to incorporate, what?
Exercise, yes.
Yes, exercise.
Okay.
Which, funnily enough, also relates back to Labraunda. I digress. On my digression. But actually, to have a more successful, at least meat pide, you're supposed to use meats that have more fat in them because fat equals flavor.
Fat does equal flavor. There's also a cat at my feet. Continuing. Feasts feasts. And meat, and fatty meat is good.
Delicious.
And Orange Theory says no, but Turkey says yes, and I tend to prioritize a sovereign nation over exercise. Continue.
That's fair. Although you might not like it when I bring up exercise here in a minute.
Probably not.
So, the ancient feast of Labraunda it definitely was a thing before the Hecatomnids came and started to rebuild and revamp the site itself.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, though, it was probably only a one-day sacrificial feast. They come in along this grand sacred way road in various processions from all around the region. You sacrifice to the god Zeus, and then you have this marvelous feast all around this grove area. Now, when the Hecatomnids come in, they actually expand the feast itself. So originally it was probably one day, and they expanded to be 5 days.
That's awesome.
It's great, isn't it?
I like that.
And we know that they did this because we have some Roman copies of epigraphic decrees that were most likely done by the Hecatomnids. And some scholars disagree necessarily on the exact wording of the inscriptions. Like, does it mean that they expanded by 4 days? Do they expand by 1 day? It's kind of vague on the actual extensionness.
Mm-hmm.
But the Swedish excavation team, when they published their findings, pretty much are conclusive that it's 5 days of feasting.
I like Swedish people. I like IKEA. I like their conclusion. I like a work week long feast.
Exactly.
And I think that should be incorporated into many aspects of life.
So we'll talk about this at the end, but the modern Turks do actually have large feasts that they celebrate in this day.
Wow. I think we need to go on a field trip.
I think so too. Turkey 2023.
2023. The cat is at the table. You cannot see this, but I need it noted that in the seat next to me, the cat is now approaching the table. Oh my gosh, it's happening.
Hi.
You can...
Do you want to talk about Labraunda with us?
Hi, baby.
Do you smell the chorizo on my hand?
You want some feta? Hello. You are a precious being. Hello.
Take my hand. All right. But back to bye, kitty.
Bye, sweet bean.
Only fun times here at Bring the Turkey to the Table.
We bring cats to the table too,
Oh.
but not to eat.
We digress a lot, but the whimsy and mysticalness of feasting will do that to you, folks. So be forewarned.
The whimsy. That's a fun word for wine.
I mean, hey, these feasts were meant to be ritualistic experiences.
Did they have wine?
Yes.
Was it good wine, do you think?
For the Hecatomnids, probably.
I don't know. Ancient wine is like a weird concept.
It was pretty watered down.
You strain it too?
Yeah.
Sorry, I broke the fourth wall. Back to feasting.
Speaking of the mysticism, we have totally gotten carried away.
It's the wine.
No, it's not.
It's not the wine. We would never.
We're just naturally this chaotic.
Yes.
It's true. So, feasting in Labraunda. So, the feast itself did occur before the Hecatomnids come in and start revamping the city. However, not only do they revamp the actual structure of the site itself, but they do extend the ritualness.
And we love that for them.
We do love that for them. And as I was saying, we know this because of epigraphic remains of later Roman copies, that they did extend it by some increment of time. Most seem to agree was 5 days. People can argue semantics in the comments, what have you.
Those people need a life.
Honestly. But so we have this 5-day. Yes. We have this 5-day festival.
Okay.
And now earlier I had said that the site itself probably wasn't very populated for its just everyday life. You got the priests, their families, slaves, workmen, some farmers to keep track with the sacred groves. your usual people who are there to work. But when it comes to the festival, we could probably expect...
The cat has gotten stuck on my sweater.
So we should expect thousands of people coming to this site for this feasting ritual.
Gotcha.
And this is where we start to get into more abstract ideas of dining and modern scholars' interpretations of how these dining practices can yield information about the societal layout, cultural norms, and overall, like, the great hierarchy of dining. Because where you sit says a lot about you in your dining rituals.
I remember this from the cafeteria lunch table in high school.
Oh, God. So, I actually did eat in the cafeteria in high school. For the first 2 years, I would go to the library and a group of us would watch Family Feud on the little TVs that they had there. So we had a Family Feud club where we would literally just sit there for the 30 minutes of lunch and shout out answers in the library.
That is significantly better than my high school lunch, where I sat at the end of that table and came up with a theory as to the social hierarchy of said table. They did not appreciate it when I shared.
Oh,
and I knew in that moment I was meant to be an anthropologist.
And now here you are.
Yeah. Except teenagers are essentially animals.
That's true.
Zoologist.
The cheese is really good.
The meat is good.
This is
overall really good.
This is a lot better than last week's Monty.
We don't talk about that.
Anyway, so the Feast of Labraunda, we could expect thousands of people coming along either the Sacred Way, going through the Propylaea that I talked about earlier. And there was also a more minor road from the north where other villages could come for the festival.
Mm-hmm.
So we can imagine almost a pilgrimage to this site for this particular feast. There are probably other feasts throughout the year, but we don't have really any evidence for them. We just know mainly about this one big feast that occurred for 5 days. Now, the hierarchy of dining here is very important because, as I said, it really establishes the social hierarchy and where you are in the society at large.
Okay.
So the hecatomnids and their friends or family, whoever...
The cool kids
tables would be in the andrones.
Amen.
The audacity. So they would be in the andrones. And something that's really cool about these andrones is that they're not completely just rectangular features. They actually have windows that are preserved.
Whoa.
So you could see, obviously, like, outside towards the larger grove and where everyone's feasting and having a good time. But all around you, you could see out into the mountainside.
Ooh,
and have this very idealistic view of the world around you.
I love a view.
Mm-hmm.
Like, big?
Yeah, like, they're pretty big.
Wow.
Like, I would actually say they're probably the size of the window behind you, if not a little bit lesser in length.
That's really cool.
It's really cool.
Windows are neat.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the few pieces of evidence that we can have that says that they used windows in some of these structures because the site itself is actually fairly well preserved. It's not the best, but it's pretty good.
Oh, not everything can get covered by a volcano, Nina. Okay. Windows in the fancy house with the cool kids table of men, which is probably... Yeah, but it's in the men house.
That's true.
And the cool kids, and those are just, like, my least favorite things.
That's true. So you have the cool kids in the andrones, and some debate about the exact number of couches that were probably in these structures. Somewhere between 11 and 20 couches are the numbers that I've seen that could fit into these structures. And you could either fit 1 or 2 people per couch, so we should imagine somewhere between 20 to 40 people in each androne. And at this time, there were 2, A and B, probably.
B and A.
You can argue about the chronology in the comments. I really don't care. So you have these 2 andrones with windows that have views all around you. And if you're in the andrones, you're in the cool kids table. Yeah. Now, the secondary lesser cool kids, but still important table, are in the stoas.
I'm imagining this entirely as the introduction to Mean Girls, where it's like you got your jocks, your burnouts, anyway, your stoas.
You have your andrones, you have your stoas. So the stoas have about 6 rooms in them for the purposes of feasting. And in total, you could probably fit about 60 couches in these andrones.
So many.
So you can have anywhere between 120 or 150 people in these stoas for the purposes of this feasting ritual. Now, I thought it was interesting the way that some of these stoa spaces were described, because if we're thinking about a hierarchy of dining, you clearly have your people in the andrones, the cool kids. There's also like more micro levels of hierarchy. Whoever has the best views in the andrones is still higher, so probably that's where the hecatomonids would sit.
No, I remember this. I remember this from the cafeteria. It was in my little lunchtime thesis.
But in the stoas, it's a lot harder to achieve that level of micro hierarchy because you're in a longer space. And so I've seen various scholars either interpret this as like the secondary but egalitarian dining space, where you're not in the cool kids clique, but you're all on an almost equal viewing level.
Oh, no, that's really interesting. Like the power dynamics of sight lines are so fascinating, and something I think that is neglected in a lot of scholarship and a lot of like phenomenological studies of what do you visually have access to and how that reflects your access within the community to a larger extent.
There's been
but we digress. Stay tuned for next week.
We're digressing a lot, but that's what a typical meal is. You never stay on topic for one thing.
Exactly, especially when you're sitting at the slightly lesser than cool but still cool, like on equal footing. Like, look how we face each other. Sight lines.
Honestly,
this is a level of egalitarianism here. Where's like the worst place? Where's like the kids' table?
There doesn't so the kids' table, if we had to call it that, or
we don't have to. I just like to.
The kids' tables are not in these more permanent structures, but we should imagine that to help accommodate thousands of people coming to the site, that there would have been a lot of temporary sort of camping-like structures.
Ooh, okay.
Where people could set up to enjoy. I mean, it's a 5-day feast. You have to have a place for yourself and whoever you're with to be able to enjoy being there for 5 days. So we should imagine that there's lots of like tents, wooden establishments, like places for people to come, but they don't survive in the archaeological record because they weren't meant to be permanent. But so if we have like, let's just say if we're going to the max, we have like 80 people in both the andrones, you have like 300 some odd people in the stoas. That's still like a couple hundred people that you also have to accommodate in a relatively small space. So we should imagine that it's basically like I don't want to call it Coachella.
I was literally thinking Coachella, and then I was wondering if it was inappropriate to call it Coachella, so I'm really glad you said it before I did. Because that kind of sounds like Coachella. But, I mean, it makes sense that this year-round is not a place that supports really dense habitation, but when it becomes applicable, when it is the time for this feast, that non-permanent structures are set up to accommodate everybody else. Or at least structures that are not so permanent as to be preserved easily.
So we have that underlying notion of the permanence versus the temporariness, the visibility, and really the visibility is key when it comes to determining this social hierarchy. And at the center of it is the hecatomonid family.
Oh, an egg. Okay, hecatomonid, yeah.
Yeah, at the center of it is the hecatomonid family. And what's interesting is that after their deaths, those andrones that I mentioned probably became like centers for their like ruler cults also.
Ooh. That's nice. Like repurpose, reduce, reuse.
So
recycle.
Mausolus would have had a more cultic site in his Andrones with his wife Artemisia, who, fun fact, was also his sister.
Fun fact indeed.
And then Idrius would have had his own as well in his Andrones.
But they wouldn't have been eating our amazing... Would they eat this? What do they eat? What do you do during this feast besides try very, very hard to eat your egg in a non-destructive manner?
About to say, like, this is so not structurally sound
The
here.
egg has lost its integrity. It's slipping, it's sliding.
I'm at least glad that we let it cook a little bit longer, because it was really slipping and sliding the first time I tried to take it out.
Me too. I mean, if only we had a couple of musicians, some people dancing, we might as well be there. Am I right? Or am I entirely incredibly wrong?
No, you're very right.
Okay.
So
cool.
at the site, we should imagine various animals like cows, goats, boars? No.
It's like a pig.
Oh, yeah.
It's a wild pig. That's a boar.
Yeah, it's a boar.
Okay.
The feast has taken my mind.
Different animals.
So we should imagine these various animals being brought in along the processions with all these people that are pilgrimaging to the site. And then they would be sacrificed near the temple, not in the temple, because that's not good. You don't want to have death in the temple. No. So you sacrifice the animals, and then as the priests are burning the various fats. Fatty meat. Fat
want
good.
the fatty meat.
Fat is good.
Suck it, Orange Theory. Sorry.
Oh my goodness. I hope they never see this. But, so they burn the fat to pay homage to Zeus Labraundus, and then you start to feast on the various animals as they're being sacrificed.
You eat the fatty meat for Axie Zeus.
Exactly.
I think that was an excellent summary. As someone who is learning as they're going.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
So we have all these animals to be sacrificed. We should also imagine that wine is being brought in as well, because what's a feast without some wine? Hashtag sponsor us, Pompey. That'd be so nice. I love their wine a lot.
I'm enjoying it.
It's good. That's their good Brunello.
The Brunello?
But so, as these people are feasting, we should also imagine that there would have been lots of musicians around and lots of just overall merriment and
atmosphere.
Yeah, it's an atmosphere. You want to have this be a good time for everyone, no matter if you're seated in the Androns, in the Stoa, or just in your temporary Coachella kiddie table area. Like, you want it to be a good time. And not only would you have the sacrifices, the feasting, the music, but there were also athletic games being performed at this site as well. There's a stadium about a few hundred meters away from the site where they would host racing games and other athletic events. And interestingly, we actually see a few Panathenaic amphorae that would be rededicated to Zeus at the site.
Oh, cool.
So someone who won a race in Athens brought their vase all the way to Labraunda in Turkey to dedicate the vase at this feast, most likely.
That's really interesting. I had no idea.
It's really, I mean, it's literally 5 days of spectacle. Whether it's sports, music, eating, it's just, we should imagine the entire, well, maybe not the entire, but like this Carian community really coming together, celebrating their god, and doing it in the way that both highlights societal norms, allows for hierarchy to be shown, because that's really, at the end of the day, the Hecatonids can be as gracious as they want to be with giving this to them, but at the same time, it's still establishing them at the top of the food chain.
I mean, that's, I would say, definitive for a lot of feasting cultures.
Exactly.
This is a really interesting intersection of performance theory, like network theory, habitus, so many different relational nodes coming together between reinforcing structures and using the religious undertones to do so while also celebrating them. Okay. Very cool.
It's this entire spectacle, and at the heart of it is we have to imagine this satrap family trying to establish themselves in this larger region that they are now in charge of.
If they served this, they would establish it. You have established yourself as my satrap.
Why, thank you.
Put that on a Valentine's card. Okay, so this family is incorporating so many different lenses to portray themselves to the community, to establish themselves within it, to reinforce that structure.
Right.
Tying it to religion, to politics, to social...
This is so not structurally sound.
Eat the egg. Oh God, it's gonna fall. You gotta eat it fast,
I'm getting
or it's
there.
gonna be... I'm not pressuring you. I'm just saying, if you don't, that will happen. Did she call it? Or
It
did
was
she
so
call it?
yolky.
Do you want to...
I have one, thank you.
Okay.
That was so fucking good, even though it just like exploded.
But the
all
good
over.
thing is you have bread that you can soak the rest up with.
That's true.
I'm gonna soak some too.
Do it.
But
yes, the family...
it's about family.
At the end of the day, it's about family.
So... But what happens after them?
Yeah, so after the Hecatomnids, really after the Persian Wars happened a long time now. I don't know why, but well, those damn Athenians.
Those damn Athenians.
Always ruining good things.
I have a lecture on this and I teach Greek debates.
But so...
Yeah, what happens after this family? Like, how does this continue? What happens when this very central aspect is no longer the central aspect?
Yeah, so we should remember that this is all happening in the 4th century BCE.
Okay.
And we really don't see a lot of change after the Hecatomnids are essentially gone. The practices seem to keep going. We know that at least the Romans are coming along and copying some of these rules for the feast. That's where we get any semblance of the extension from the 1 to 5 days aspect is from Romans copying these previous decrees in the epigraphic record. And so it doesn't really seem to change that much from the 4th century BCE, from the Hellenistic period, up to that 1st century CE mark when the Romans really start pushing into Anatolia.
They set a fashion.
Really?
That becomes tradition and then is passed down.
Exactly. Like it's interesting how little change there is in terms of the buildings program. I mean, we really don't see that many new buildings being set up prior to some of the Roman times. And even then, it's not necessarily a sense, because we see in other Turkish sites that like the Roman emperors take various interests in some of these Turkish sites, like Miletus or Pergamon and some of these more coastal areas. And like Miletus is in the Carian region, but when we see the developments in the Roman period, it really is through the priests that are still there. There are now they have Roman-y like names now, so there is some Roman influence being pushed onto the site, but it doesn't really seem to necessarily change the format of it per se. We get other inclusions. There's another Andron added. There's some baths.
Andron C?
Andron C.
Andron C.
Andron C.
And baths.
And baths, because what's a Roman
Without
place
a bath?
without a bath?
Arguably cleaner. Those baths were gross. Continue.
So they found these very interesting, like, copper or bronze heads of the couches that are shaped like dogs. I know. They're nice. These couches were really nice in the Androns.
Are they cute? That's not
Not
that's
really.
Not necessary,
It kind of
but-
looks a little weird, in my opinion. Like, I can show
Yeah.
it to you later, but it's not like... It's kind of got a weird look to it.
Great, that's fair. That has...
Insert picture here.
Aesthetics have nothing to do with archaeological importance, but I'm honestly curious because she said dog couch. But
It's like the footrest or
okay.
rest area of the couch. What do you call that?
The armrest?
But you wouldn't really be armrested.
what
Like,
are
if you're
you-
reclining, it wouldn't like...
Your body rest. That's still the the arm of
I don't
it.
think they would actually be. I don't know.
If that's the
The
foot,
end of the couch.
That's the arm. But how does that history of excavation? So we're talking about they found these things.
Right.
Well, who are they? Who's interacting with it? And how is that shaping our understanding to this day?
Yeah, so the site itself probably goes out of use in the 5th century CE at the time where pagan cults are being shut down in favor of Christianity, and there's actually a Christian church at this site.
Oh, of course.
It was built in this late antique period in the Propylaea area, which I think is kind of symbolic as them almost like blocking.
No, but you can't get in because it's a church. Oh.
Symbolism. But anyway, so the site falls out of use in the 5th century 5th century CE, the late antique period, one might say. And really there seems to be a disconnect between what I will call the travel scholars and the ancient site. Now, travel scholars, I mean the ones that are really just sort of going about in the 17 and 1800s, cataloging things as opposed to like what we would think of as modern scholars or archaeologists.
Yeah, this is like the grand tour.
Exactly.
You go around, you observe, you take notes. It's social capital.
Exactly. So one of the problems with studying Labraunda at that particular period in history is that the ancient sources don't always, they're not clear on where it's at. They mention Labraunda, they mention, like Herodotus mentions Labraunda, Strabo mentions Labraunda, Aelian mentions Labraunda. Oddly, they seem really focused on the idea that there is a pond where the fish and eels wear gold.
Goldfish?
No, they wear gold, like jewelry.
The fish wear gold jewelry?
And the eels.
And the eels have like no part that sticks off them. Where are they putting it?
You
Do
have to
eels have
Go
fins?
ask Strabo, not me.
This is why archaeology is important and, quote, men.
But so, like, the literary sources don't give you a lot of help.
Who would have thought?
What a concept. You have to actually look outside the literary sources.
Wow. And the grand tour.
Ugh. But so, in the 1800s, we start to get our first quote-unquote visitors to the site. Now, one of the reasons that some modern scholars think the site was harder to find was because the area is more like mountainous in this pass. It's very woody. It's hard to traverse if you're a foreigner, basically.
Yeah.
It's also filled with apparently wolves, bears, and other ferocious creatures.
They have bears?
Apparently.
Okay. I learn something new every episode.
I swear one of them said tigers. I might be misremembering that, but I swear one of them said tigers.
I personally would also not traverse this terrain.
So like lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my.
Yeah.
So like you're in a densely packed area, and it was thought that the reason why maybe Labraunda was discovered, quote unquote, so much later was probably because of the natural terrain around it.
Yeah, that topography is not inviting.
No. And it's been out of use for so long, it wasn't very populated to begin with, so it doesn't continue on outside of its primary religious purpose. And so, like, when it falls out of use and no one uses it for a couple hundred years, you kind of forget where it is.
Yeah, I lose my phone every single day. Not like you would lose Labraunda the way you'd lose a phone. You would just imagine.
I lost my phone like we lost Labraunda.
How do you lose a woman? You forget to cherish her.
How do you lose Labraunda? You forget to participate in the
have
feast.
feast. This is why you need meals with friends. Okay.
So the site was considered lost for a long time.
All right, then we find it.
It's a little weird. So you have these earlier travelers.
Are they British?
Some of them are.
Of course.
There's this one noble British society in the 1700s that sends out some of their members to explore Turkey.
Of course they did.
And they claim that they have found Labraunda.
Of course they did. They did not. Of course not.
They actually found another site nearby. It's still in the Carian region.
Okay, not too bad.
They thought that they had found the sanctuary of Zeus, basically. And
psych.
They did find a Corinthian sanctuary.
Okay, well, that's something to sneeze at.
It just wasn't the one for Zeus Labraunda.
Okay.
I'm very sorry, but also, like, y'all fucked up.
That's what you get as a colonialist power.
Hot damn.
I think it's also just nice to read some of these earlier travel reports, even though they're not very, like, academic or scholarly, but you really get a sense of what they see. And so he didn't necessarily know what he was looking at, per se. He thought it was something else, but he is one of the first, like, visitors to Labraunda itself.
And I think there is definitely something to be said about that non-academic seeing for the first time lens where you're not colored by preconceptions. You're not trying to fit something to what you think it is. You are explaining what you see from a blank slate that makes it particularly valuable in comparison to other sources.
I think it's just overall something that I think more academics need to get used to is this idea that we can't just stay in our sphere.
And that other people have important, helpful ideas, that there is nothing lost in dialogue.
Or even just like people are interested. Mm-hmm. They want to know some of these things, but the way academia can be set up is it's very hard to get into that.
Yeah, it's this weird thing where it's like, yes, you are, in a way, you are like a keeper of knowledge. But you're not a keeper from others. You preserve it, but you don't hoard it. Exactly. You should share it. Part of your glorious responsibility is to be a communicator of this.
Exactly.
That will be in week 5 after this.
We're just pre-planning all the future episodes right here.
Okay, so let's kind of move forward a decade or two. How do we start to get publishings about the site?
So the first ever real publishings come to us from a more French epigraphist named Felipe. Only a few decades or so after our earlier travelers. So
we're like 1844.
Yeah.
Not too far.
No, it's pretty close chronologically from some of these earlier explorers. And interestingly, he actually claims himself to be the one who like found Labraunda.
Well, of course he did.
That's an interesting note. It's an interesting note that some of the modern scholars say when looking back at these travel records is that none of them really acknowledge each other. They're always like, yes, I was here, and I found this, and I saw this, and don't you just love it?
Who's surprised? Not me.
No. But so, in this mid-19th century, we get some of the first publishings of the site, and what makes him more distinct from the early travelers is that he is an epigraphist. Mm-hmm. So he actually brings about, I think, 5,000 renderings, sketches back of the epigraphy that he sees at the site. That's just to show how much epigraphic evidence is at this area. I mean, there's a lot. And he also brings along another artist with him who does many hundreds of sketches. We start to get the first actually mathematically correct proportions of some of these monuments. And fun fact, from my understanding of the events that took place in the mid-19th century, all of these were published without the original guy's knowledge.
What?
Like, he didn't know that it was going to be published.
I would love to be part of that lawsuit.
I don't think he's sued, but like, we have our first sort of publications, sketches that are coming out around this time, and it's bringing in some mishmash interest in the site itself.
How do we go from French epigrapher to Swedish excavation?
It's really, I mean, it just, you bring in more travelers that are interested by all these things that now the French are bringing in.
Okay.
And some of the stuff is now being moved into, like, France. And so it generates various interest in the site. And it all leads to the climax in the 1940s, like 1948, where the first actual excavations are undertaken by the Swedish excavators.
Which is so much later than people had realized that this existed.
Exactly. And actually, fun fact, no one actually confirmed that the site was Labraunda until the Swedes came in and started excavating. Like, people were speculating, and it was something that I thought was an interesting digression between the travel writers and modern scholarship was the idea that it took the Swedish excavations to excavate the epigraphic remains to be like, sure, yeah, these things are mentioning Labraunda and Zeus Labraundos, but now we have like the temple to Zeus Labraundos. We have the stoas. And it took that to be like, yes, this is Labraunda, versus these earlier travelers, especially our poor Frenchman Felipe, who actually cataloged a lot of these inscriptions, or at least had some of these etchings, sketches, what have you. But it's technically not confirmed that this is Labraunda until the Swedes take over excavations in 1948.
That's a century later.
Yeah.
This is why we shop at IKEA. They get things done.
They do get things done.
So unfortunately, due to some storage errors and some misunderstandings of how the recording would work, we lost the last few minutes of this video. However, I did just want to briefly wrap things up. In terms of the modern Swedish excavations, they were first run by Axel Persson, who was originally hoping to establish some form of connection with the ancient Carian script to Minoan and Mycenaean Linear B. Now, he thought that this would be a thing because Labraunda and Labyrinth have very similar linguistic roots, and combined with the double axe imagery, which does appear commonly in Minoan and Mycenaean sites, he thought that this would help further his claims of a connection between the Carians and the Greek civilizations. Unfortunately, he died in 1951 and was replaced by another Swedish archaeologist, and the excavations sort of reach their initial conclusion in the 1960s. It kind of goes on and off for a little bit after that, and once things really start to pick up again in 2004, the Swedes are now fully back under control of Labraunda, of the excavations. The current director is Olivier Henry, who is actually a French-Turkish archaeologist, and his co-director, Ormu Kakmakli, is also a Turkish archaeologist. And so these ideas of feasting have really seemed to permeate a lot of different time periods for the ancient Anatolians, and we can see this having a greater impact on some modern Turkish festivals, such as the sacrifice feast that is celebrated across Turkey, a 4-day Islamic tradition where people can sacrifice animals and give to the poor, and just overall there's this greater sense of togetherness. And so feasting's really not contained to just this ancient vacuum where we only have to look at a few ancient sites, but it's really a continuous spectrum, which is something that I think is very interesting. And it's just nice to see how people can be almost united in this sense of feasting. So that is all we have for today. Please join us next time. Catherine will be back, and we will be looking at Hittite feasting at Al-Kahoyuk, where we will attempt to make Turkish delight and hopefully delight our viewers. Bye.